their faith in them as politicians because they say the right words. I'm not just interested in having politicians who say the right words. I want them to do the right thing. Doing the right thing is even more important than saying the right words. Words don't change this country. Actions do. And we need a president who will change things by his actions, not just saying things if you want to do it. That's why I believe that it's important that we continue to hold to the tradition. Not because we're trying to hurt someone or offend somebody, to hold to the tradition. That the family is still the basic unit of our civilization. And that marriage means something. It doesn't mean everything, it means something. And what it means is one man, one woman for life, because that's the arrangement in which children are created, and that's how, in a family environment, that we actually train our replacements so they can become the next generation. And we need to do all we can under brother, not undermine the family. When you start changing the definitions of things like life and family, you can get into some trouble. My wife mentioned that all of our 3 children are working with us in the campaign, helping out in various ways. We have a son who's 31, a son who's 27 and married to a wonderful young lady, and then our daughter's 25. Our oldest son, when he was 12 years old, kind of picked on his little brother and little sister. I'm sure that might surprise you, that my older brother would do something like that. Never happened in your house, for sure. One day we were all going to go shopping, and he begged that he could stay home. And frankly, considering how he picked on them every time we went out and the trouble it would sometimes cause, we took a family vote. And by a 5-0 vote, we agreed he gets to stay home for a couple of hours while we went out. Well, when we came back in, my son John Mark said, Dad, while you guys were gone, I did something really neat for the family. I said, really, what'd you do? He said, well, Dad, I made you a cake. Well, I was pretty impressed because my son was not exactly normally given to doing gracious, nice, generous things for the rest of us. And good kid, but just didn't think like that. So I was so impressed that he would take the time that he had to himself to make a cake for the rest of us that I instantly was thinking, now I need to give him some wonderful affirmation, some really positive dad talk. So I said, son, I'd like to have a piece of that cake. Why don't you bring me some? So he went over and started bringing it on the little plate, carving it all up. As he was, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to taste that cake. The first thing out of my mouth is going to be words of affirmation and praise for that cake that he's made. He brought me the cake. It looked good. I put the fork down in it, put it into my mouth. Right out of my mouth came the cake. Not the words of affirmation, because that was the worst tasting cake I ever had in my life. Now, my first thought was, my son is trying to kill me. I'm thinking, his mother has told him how much life insurance is on my head. This boy's figured out, bumped Dad off, and we're pretty well off here. That's when I started thinking like that guy. They asked him one time, how much life insurance have you got? He said, I don't have any, I'm not going to get any. And when they asked him why, he said, because when I die, I want it to be a sad day for everybody. I looked at my son's face, and I could see in his face anything but just expectation. He was clearly as shocked as I was at how bad the cake was. And I said, son, out of curiosity, did you use a recipe for the cake? He said, yes, sir, I did. I said, could I see that recipe? He said, yes, sir. And he went and got it and brought it, and I was looking at it. It looked like a very ordinary recipe for a very ordinary chocolate cake. And I said, now, son, are you sure you followed this recipe just like it says here? He said, well, yes, sir, I did, Dad. He said, now, Dad, there was one thing that I didn't fully understand. In the recipe, it called for a dash of salt. And Dad, I didn't know what a dash meant, but I figured that a cup would be enough. This is a true story. My son made a chocolate cake and put a cup of salt in the recipe. For those of you that don't fully understand, although I think you will, that's not a good recipe for a cake. In fact, you put a cup of salt in a cake recipe, you won't eat the cake. But if you have cows around the place, they'll lick it on it for a week or so. Well, I realized that my son had made a noble effort. He was sincere as he could be. His intentions were good. It wasn't that he had failed in his motive or his work or his reasons for doing what he did. The problem was he made up his own definitions of what a dash meant, and the result was a disaster. Sometimes when people say, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you just really believe it. Well, it doesn't matter what you do or what you think, as long as you're just sincere and you really care. That sounds wonderful. It's not true. What you believe matters. And what you do matters. Ladies and gentlemen, you need a president who believes something and who will do what he believes. Because if you don't believe things, and if you don't do what you believe, you can't change those definitions of what's right and what's wrong and not end up with the disaster as the result. And that's why we've got to understand that some things are still right, some things are still wrong. And if we don't have that kind of leadership and direction, and a president that will look you in the eye and tell you the truth, this country is truly going to be in a whole lot more trouble than it already is. That's why tonight this caucus matters. That's why tonight when you go out in less than 6 hours and gather with your friends and relatives and people from work, neighbors from around your neighborhood, get